Hello everyone. We are in MOOC Swayam course on nationalism and constitutional growth in India, 1858 to 1920. For the last so many uh, lectures, so many weeks, we have been deliberating on very important event in the history of India, that is the constitutional growth. Post revolt of 1857, we saw that how the direct control by the British government, in fact from Parliament of England, started initiating constitutional reforms by introducing Government of India Act 1858 to various other reforms like 1961 Indian Council, 1861 Indian Councils Act, then 1892 Indian Councils Act. In between, the many events which happened ultimately led to that what is called the freedom struggle or Indian national movement, especially under the banner of the organization called Indian National Congress. We also saw that how Indian National Congress was divided on many strategic issues. One of the issue which we grappled with was the issue of that what we call it uh, moderates and extremists. The use of violence, the use of force, which in a way was liked by many of the revolutionaries for the same purpose, for the same goal. The goal was to make India self-determined, self-government, independent country, which people of India will be deciding their fate by becoming, sovereign state. So, we saw that Congress got divided into those factions, and ultimately, also the parallel British government, in a way, initiating various kinds of policies of divide and rule, ultimately led to partition of Bengal. And because of the partition of Bengal, there's a kind of mindset getting developed based on divide and rule, where Muslim League was formed. All India Muslim League was formed in December 1906 in Dhaka, where All India Muslim League, in fact, started demanding for more representation for Muslims, also kind of highlighting the various biases within the Indian National Congresses, sessions particularly. Then All India Muslim League started parallel organization. Ultimately, that what we see, that there is another constitutional reform which accepted the demand of the Muslim League by granting separate electorate, and that led to kind of division within the Indian national movement of parallel kind of organizations, sometimes collaborating with the government policies, and sometimes trying to be very critical of them. So, let us today talk about the same, factions, the divisions between Indian National Congress and All India Muslim League, who are now going to have agreement that ultimately that what is kind of out of sight, is basically the goal, the purpose of independence, and British Raj, the British government, which is continuing, may continue longer if we will not collaborate together and will not fight together against the mighty British Raj. So, because of the First World War, British government itself has been, into many crises. Also, the home rule, which have already started, in April and September 1916 by Tilak and Besant, and then what we are seeing, that Indian National Congress meeting in, Lucknow, where many of the proposals are on the platter, and ultimately Indian Muslim League, in a way, is kind of joining hand together with the Indian National Congress. So we'll see, the background of the Lucknow Pact, and also uh, many of the many of the issues which were discussed, and what was the final result, what was the final outcome, who were the people who played a very crucial role in those negotiations. So let us tune ourselves to study about the Lucknow Pact. So this is the picture on the screen. If you can see, is just after the First World War, the Viceroy Lord Chelmsford had solicited reform suggestions from Indians in return for the Indian support to the British war effort. As Besant already has pointed out, that this is a very, very opportune moment for Indian freedom struggle during the World War One. There's a lot of things started happening. The Gada movement started happening in 1914. We see, many of the events, home rule and other things were also kind of, parallelly going on because of the gradual kind of representation that what we saw in monumental reforms, and later we'll see more expansion in the Montego Chelmsford reform. That how these constitutional reforms in a way was a kind of prize by the British government because of the Indian support to the British war effort. Now, the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, wanted to use this opportunity to press for constitutional reforms through a joint Hindu Muslim platform. And in fact, Jinnah was then a member of both the parties, and he was largely responsible for the pact. This was the first time that leaders of both the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League were meeting for a joint session. At the meeting, the leaders consulted with each other and drafted a set of demands for constitutional reforms. In October 1916, 19 elected Indian members of the Imperial Legislative Council addressed a memorandum to the Viceroy seeking reforms. In November 1916, leaders from both the parties met again in Calcutta and discussed and demanded the suggestions. Finally, at their respective annual sessions held at Lucknow in December 1916, the Indian National Congress and the League confirmed the agreement. This came to be known as the Lucknow Pact. For his efforts, Sarojini Naidu gave Jinnah the title the Ambassador of Hindu Muslim Unity. The same ambassador of Hindu Muslim unity is going to be called as Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who will be the leader of one of the divisive politics that what we see is the formation of Pakistan. What were the factors behind Muhammad Ali Jinnah to let the demand for separate territorial state like Pakistan? They resisted to that. Ambassador of Hindu Muslim unity had a change of mind and change of heart. There must be some reason to that. We will be discussing in the next segment, or rather the next course, which will be starting from 1920 to 1947. Where we'll be seeing all those events unfolding from Chauri Chora to Nehru Report to 1930 Allahabad delivery of presidential address of Allama Iqbal, and then we'll see various roundtable conferences, and then Pune Pact, and then ultimately 1937 formation of Government of India Act 1935, and many more things which ultimately unfolded towards what is called Pakistan Resolution or Lahore Resolution 1940, and then the main mission which came, and ultimately India got independence, but with a very deepening sorrow of the partition, and that partition in a way, was a disastrous event where we will be seeing in the next course when we will have more discussion in those weeks of the course on constitutional growth and freedom movement 1920 to 1947, culminating into the framing of the Constitution of India, where the Constituent Assembly, responsible for drafting the Constitution of India, ultimately on 26th November 1949, and India becoming republic on 26th January 1950. So Muhammad Ali Jinnah, as we are seeing in the Lucknow Pact, is a very different personality. That's what I wanted to remind you all. And of course, we will be seeing in this course only, the political biography of many of the leaders pre 1920 in some of the lectures, so that students are kind of able to think on the lines, and also with the ideas, the political ideas, that what was happening in the beginning of 20th century, where ultimately Indian minds were thinking about several of the questions like democracy, secularism, equality, liberation, and many more things. Is the events which we are already aware of is the formation of the Muslim League, well, with pro-British inclination. Uh, Ultimately, the First World War, in a way, kind of forced British government to seek some of the suggestions for constitutional reform, ultimately in exchange for their support during the war effort. Now, what was the role of Muhammad Ali Jinnah? So, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a member of both the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, saw this as an opportunity to press constitutional reform through a joint Hindu-Muslim platform. He played a significant role in advocating for joint efforts between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. So the first joint session of Indian, National Congress and Muslim League happened in Lucknow, and this is called Lucknow Pact, and it had roots in the first ever joint session of leaders from both the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. Leaders of both parties gathered, consulted with each other, and drafted a set of demands for constitutional reforms. There was memorandum to Viceroy in October 1916. In October 1916, 19 elected Indian members of the Imperial Legislative Council addressed a memorandum to the Viceroy, formally seeking constitutional reform. In Calcutta meeting in November 1916, Indian National Congress and Muslim League leaders, they met together to discuss and also amend the reform suggestions, working towards a common agreement. So ultimately happened Lucknow session, where already the working of the common agreement has happened, and then a final agreement was confirmed at the respective annual sessions of the INC and the Muslim League, which held in December 1916. What were the reforms? What were the reforms suggested in the Lucknow Pact? So the idea of self-government in India, which was already there, is a critique of the monumental reforms, where leaders, in fact, pressed their demand for self-government, like Dadabhai Nauroji, Tilak, and others. Where Tilak returned, from jail, Mandale jail. Tilak, in fact, was more emphatic on the very idea of self-government, and hence that what we are seeing, that it was one of the suggestion in the Lucknow Pact. Also about the abolition of the Indian Council. I mean, how Indian Council is going to determine the fate of the Indian people. Indian people are not getting the representation into various organs of the government, like legislature, executive, and judiciary. They should be given seats and also reservation and representation. In fact, the another reform suggestion was separation of the executive from the judiciary, which actually recommended the separation of the executive and judiciary branches, because if not actually separated, judiciary and executive actually can go in tandem, and then that will be a massive force to repress and suppress the Indian people. And also, salaries of the Secretary of State for Indian Affairs. This reform suggestion suggested that the salaries of the Secretary of State for Indian Affairs be paid from British coffers rather than Indian funds. Why Indians are actually, paying the Secretary of State, who is appointed in England, and in fact, having all kind of lavish life in India on the funds of Indian people. Ultimately, British government is benefiting out of this appointment of Secretary of State. British government must pay to them. So the the demands met to the British were provided with certain common claims by both groups. International Congress and Muslim League demanded that the number of elected council seats be raised. The British government should accept as bindings the laws enacted by substantial majorities in the councils. The rights of minorities in the regions should be safeguarded. Autonomy must be provided to all provinces, establishing a buffer between the executive and judiciary. At least 50% of the executive council members must be elected, and the legislative council must have a majority of elected members. So these, with reforms, with further suggestions, were that representation for Muslims in central government, right? And this called for one-third representation for Muslims in the central government, which amounts to nearly 33% of representation. Now, whether the population of then India had a 33% of Muslim population need to be looked into. But the Indian National Congress, in fact, was very critical that Muslims do not constitute 33% of the India's population. How they are going to be given one-third representation? So, Muslim representation in provincial legislatures, though Indian National Congress accepted this proposal of the Muslim League, also Muslim representation in provincial legislatures, that advocated for a predetermined number of Muslims in the provincial legislatures of each province. The separate electorate, of course, is a continuation process where Indian National Congress then was very critical in 1909 reforms, accepted the idea of separate electorate for all communities until a joint electorate was universally demanded. The Vettis for minority representation, which proposed the introduction of a system of Vettis for minority representation, ensuring minorities more representation than their share in the population. So ultimately, if one can consider Muslims as minority, more share for minorities would eventually become more representation, more seats. Further, if we see that, the recommendation or the reform suggestions actually suggested that an increase in term of the legislative council to 5 years, Indian representation in imperial legislative council, which advocated that half the members of imperial legislative council should be Indians, direct election based on adult franchise, which proposed that all elected members should be elected directly based on adult franchise. I mean, if one can actually trace the very idea of when India became independent, India extended one of the very important right without considering any Indian as upper class or lower class, or favoring to one section of society, and having a discrimination of the other. India in fact kind of opened it, this particular right to everyone irrespective of caste, class, creed, language, or religion, which ultimately become adult franchise or right to vote. And this, in a way, was very different from all the democracies which claimed to be oldest one, or the champion of democracies. So in a way, 1916, prior to even nearly said 3 decades of India's independence, India in fact propagated for that what we know is. And the additional reforms which were on the platter was, the increase in the term of the Legislative Council to 5 years. Also, Indian representation was very abysmal. So half the members of Imperial Legislative Council should be Indians. That was advocated. Then direct election based on adult franchise. India was in 1916, 3 decades before even the independence of India. India advocated for the adult franchise, the right to vote irrespective of whoever belongs to which caste, which class, which religion or language. Everyone should be given the right to vote, and the members should be elected directly based on adult franchise. This is kind of uncommon and unprecedented in the history of the modern world, where all the democracies started with a very selective right to adult franchise. And India in fact was kind of foreseeing the future, where it would rather set the standard of egalitarianism and equality in the society, where all the communities and all the people will be feeling system of parity and social justice. Also, in terms of provincial legislature composition, if we see the reform which suggested that 4/5 of the members of provincial legislature should be elected, while 1/5 should be nominated. Also, election of legislative council president advocated this reform suggestion by the pact, that members of the legislative council should elect their president themselves. So now, in a sense, that if we try to replicate this entire reform suggestion on the modern day constitution of India, many of the things actually have been incorporated into our system of governance, where the legislative council and the legislature and the members do elect their president, and ultimately we have a adult franchisee, we have a 5 years of tenure. So in that sense, within the parliamentary system of India, we have in a way come to the time of 1916 sedition, and also later on we'll see in the Montfort reforms, or 19 reforms, where much of the things were incorporated in those documents. Um, so what was the results of Lucknow Pact? The Hindu-Muslim unity impression, as I said, that Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who though became Qaid-e-Azam later, but 1916 Muhammad Ali Jinnah was very secular, individual. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was in fact having a kind of charisma in both of the what is the organizations like International Congress and also Muslim League, and that leader in fact was the sole person to in a way uniting International Congress and Muslim League on one platform, and ultimately led to the Lucknow Pact, which created an impression of Indo-Muslim unity on the national political stage. Also, the agreement on a separate communal electorate also, in a way, formally established communal politics in India, because, in a way, the very agreement or agreeing by the International Congress on some of the demands of the Muslim League is also going to have a far, reaching impact in terms of that communal organizations like Abhinav Bharat and Yugantar and many organizations like Hindu Mahasabha and others, they are going to in fact blame Indian National Congress for succumbing to the demands made by Muslim League, and ultimately their parallel kind of a parallel kind of movement against the Muslim politics. Also, as Indian National Congress, through the Lucknow Pact, tacitly accepted the idea that India consisted of two different communities with distinct interests. So, going say further, that what we see that there was a rise of the Muslim League. This pact in a way propelled the Muslim League, which was previously less relevant. The Muslim League became a forefront organization of Indian politics alongside the Congress Party. uh, the idea of communal electorate, where the acceptance of separate electorates for Hindus and Muslims solidified the communal representation system in Indian politics. The introduction of separate electorates perpetuated religious division and laid the groundwork for the later demand for Pakistan on the basis of religion. Also, while the Lucknow Pact presented a united front, the underlying differences in separate electorates sow the seeds of future communal tensions and divisions. And then what we see is short lived unity, where the impression of Hindu Muslim unity created by the Lucknow Pact proved to be short lived as subsequent developments and events unfolded, revealing the underlying communal tensions. So, if we see the significance of the Lucknow Pact of 1916, the pact was viewed as a ray of optimism for Hindu Muslim cooperation. The Hindus and Muslims submitted a combined appeal to the British for political reform for the very first time. As a result, there was an increasing belief throughout British India that self government or home rule was a viable option. The accord also signified the pinnacle of Hindu Muslim cooperation. The Muslim League and the Indian National Congress built good relations as a consequence. Prior to the agreement, the parties were seen as adversaries who resisted one another and pursued their own goals. The accord, on the other side, created a change in that viewpoint. The Lucknow Pact also aided in the formation of a more friendly friendship or relationship among both the major factions inside the International Congress. The extremists headed by Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Bipin Chandra Pal, also known as the Lal Bal Pal trio, and the moderate factions headed by Gopal Krishna Gokhale till the time of his passing away in 1915, and afterwards headed by Mahatma Gandhi. Although 2 decades later, Jinnah argued for a distinct Muslim nation, he was a member of both the Congress and the Muslim League in 1916 and an acquaintance of Tilak. So, if we can conclude to say that the Indian National Congress commanded by Maratha leader Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and the All India Muslim League, commanded by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, were the driving forces behind the Lucknow Pact 1916. Two different poles meeting together to come up with such a grand event in the modern Indian history. After revolt of 1857, where we saw the same kind of Hindu-Muslim unity, but because of various factions and various fringes working separately for their own interest, especially 1860s onwards, that what we saw were from Shuddhi movement to Hindi-Urdu controversy to even the idea of moderates and extremists, where extremists employing all those methods and strategies which were outrightly the symbol of the majority, that in a way kind of frustrated the Muslims to go towards British government and to show their loyalty so that they can win over the British government for many of the basic things which they are denied, and also their issues and the concerns are not raised from the platform of the Indian National Congress. So obviously, they would rather venture into many of the political activities which may irritate International Congress. But what we are witnessing in 1916 is in a way a remarkable achievement by both of the organizations kind of coming to one platform in Lucknow and agreeing on certain common minimum understanding that it is ultimately the British Raj which need to be ousted, which need to be removed from the face of the governance and from India, so that people will have a right to self-determination. They will form their own government. India will become sovereign state, and these two poles who were distant apart, in fact, met together to resolve the very contention among the Indian National Congress and Muslim League. So the proposals were an improvement of the political testament by Gopal Krishna Gokhale. So the conference which held in Lucknow signified the unification of the Congress's moderate and radical sections. The treaty addressed both the framework of India's government and the relationship between Hindu and Muslim population. So this is all about the Lucknow Pact 1916. In the next segment, we will try to talk about that whether these reforms which were suggested, whether these reforms were materialized or realized in any of the constitutional reform in future, and particularly in the Montego-Chelmsford reform in 1919. We will see that how British government responded to these suggestions, because ultimately it was sought by the British government that what are the suggestions by the political actors for constitutional reform is a prize in the effort of the British, war in the World War One, and how Indians kind of, supported the war effort, and ultimately Indians were going to get the, constitutional reform and greater rights. So I stop here. Thank you so much. You are in the course called Nationalism and Constitutional Growth in India, 1858 to 1920. Thank you.